2 days after we buried my daughter, my son-in-law told me to get out. The words hung in the kitchen air, mixing with the lingering scent of funeral casseroles that well-meaning neighbors had dropped off in Tupperware containers labeled with their names. Brad Wilson didn't even look up from his phone when he delivered the blow. His fingers continued tapping the screen as if evicting a grieving father was just another mundane task on his daily checklist, somewhere between ordering coffee and checking sports scores. I stood frozen still, wearing the charcoal gray suit I'd worn to Sarah's funeral. The memorial program remained folded in my breast pocket, her smiling face looking out at the world with the kind of light that used to fill every room she entered. My fingers instinctively found it, the paper's edge worn from my repeated touches, a tactile connection to what I'd lost. Where am I supposed to go? The question emerged hollow, more breath than voice. Brad finally glanced up, his eyes flat and unreactive like those of a doll. There's a nice assisted living place on Maple Street, Sunset Manor. I looked it up, only $1,800 a month. $1,800 a month on my Social Security check of $1,400. The math wasn't just bad, it was impossible. I'd spent the last of my savings on Sarah's treatments, the experimental therapies the insurance wouldn't cover, the medications that might have given her a few more months, a few more sunrises. Brad, I don't have that kind of money. Something shifted in his expression, then a flicker of calculation replacing the practiced blankness. That's not really my problem anymore, is it? I mean, you've been living here rent-free for 7 years. Most people would call that pretty generous. Rent-free, as if I hadn't paid for groceries, utilities, and maintenance, as if I hadn't spent every weekend fixing everything Brad was too lazy to handle himself. As if my own flesh and blood hadn't wanted me here, hadn't insisted I stay after Catherine passed, knowing my pension from the construction company barely covered basic necessities. My eyes drifted to the kitchen sink faucet I'd replaced last month, to the recessed lighting I'd installed in the ceiling when Brad complained about the depressing old fixtures, to the hand-stained oak cabinets I'd refinished myself, spending weeks on my knees with sandpaper and varnish, while Brad watched football and critiqued my technique between beers. Sarah wanted me to stay. I finally managed, invoking my daughter's name like a talisman. Brad's response cut like a blade between ribs. Sarah's gone. His voice carried no emotion, just a flat statement of fact delivered with the casual cruelty of someone announcing the weather. This house now stood in a permanent shadow, one that no amount of recessed lighting could ever dispel. The next morning brought no respite. I woke to the sound of scraping and thuds coming from the garage. Still groggy from another night of grief-stained insomnia, I shuffled down the hallway in slippers and the flannel robe Sarah had given me last Christmas. To keep you warm since you refused to let me turn the thermostat above 68, she'd teased, her eyes already showing the tired circles that would deepen in the coming months. In the garage, Brad stood beside a rented dumpster, tossing cardboard boxes into its metal belly without bothering to examine their contents. My heart stopped when I recognized the colorful stickers on one box. Sarah's childhood mementos, carefully preserved for decades. Pictures from ballet recitals, school art projects, the macaroni necklace she'd made in first grade. What are you doing? Cleaning out junk. Brad didn't pause, grabbing another box. Ashley's moving in next month, and she doesn't want a bunch of old pictures lying around. Ashley, his new girlfriend, the one he'd been texting during Sarah's chemotherapy sessions when he thought no one was looking. The physical therapist with the perfect teeth and amazing energy who started as Sarah's caregiver and ended as her replacement. I'd seen the text once when Brad left his phone on the counter, hearts and suggestive comments flowing back and forth while my daughter lay connected to tubes in a hospital bed not 20 feet away. I lunged forward, grabbing a photo album from the box before it could join the others in the dumpster. The plastic cover was cool against my calloused hands, its weight substantial with memories. Inside were the photographs of Sarah's 5th birthday party, the one with the unicorn cake that took me 3 attempts to get right after Catherine passed. Sarah had declared it perfect, despite the lopsided horn and runny frosting. I clutched it to my chest, a drowning man with a life preserver. Brad continued tossing things. 23 years of birthday parties, school plays, and family vacations discarded with the indifference of someone clearing expired food from a refrigerator. I rescued what I could, but most of Sarah's childhood memories had already disappeared beneath layers of coffee grounds, fast food containers, and other garbage. You're throwing away our daughter's life, I said, my voice breaking on the word our. Brad paused for just a moment, and I caught something in his eyes, not guilt or remorse, but irritation at being interrupted. She's not our daughter anymore, Tom. She's just your daughter, and you're just a tenant who's overstayed his welcome. By Wednesday evening, he'd changed the locks on the tool shed where I kept my equipment, expensive tools I'd collected over 40 years in construction and real estate development. Tools worth more than Brad's precious BMW that he washed every Saturday morning with obsessive precision. When I confronted him, he shrugged and tossed me a single key. Security precaution, he explained, not meeting my eyes. Can't be too careful these days. That's when he handed me the papers, a 30-day notice to vacate printed on official letterhead he'd probably stolen from his insurance office. The document looked professional with citations of Colorado tenancy law highlighted in yellow. Brad had even signed his name with a flourish, as if evicting his father-in-law deserved a special signature. 30 days, I said, staring at the date, to find a place, pack up 40 years of belongings, and start over. That's the legal minimum in Colorado. Brad straightened his tie, a gesture of self-importance he'd adopted after his last promotion. I'm being more than fair. Fair. The man who'd never paid a dime for the roof over his head thought he was being fair. The same man who'd complained about hospital parking fees while Sarah was dying. The same man who'd asked, "Can't you just visit on weekends? This is costing me a fortune in Gaiman." As if the daily journey to be with my child during her final months was an unreasonable expense. "Brad, please, can we talk about this? Maybe work something out?" He laughed, actually laughed. The sound bounced off the garage walls like something hard and broken. "Work what out, Tom? You're a retired handyman living on Social Security. I'm a successful insurance adjuster with a college degree and a career. What exactly do you bring to the table?" I looked at this man who'd slept under my roof for 7 years, who'd eaten meals I'd cooked, who'd never once said thank you for the 1,000 small repairs I'd made to keep his life comfortable. "You'd be surprised," I said quietly. But Brad had already walked away, probably to text Ashley about how he'd finally gotten rid of the old man. He had no idea that tomorrow would change everything. Thursday morning, I sat in my bedroom, the bedroom Brad was about to take away from me, and made a list of everything I stood to lose. Not just the house, though, that hurt enough. This was where Sarah had grown up, where she'd taken her first steps, said her first words, brought home her first report card. Every room held 40 years of memories that Brad was about to erase. But it was more than sentiment. At 63, starting over wasn't just difficult. It was potentially impossible. I checked Brad's suggestion about Sunset Manor. $1,800 a month was just the base rate. Add meals, laundry, and basic care, and we were talking $2,500 minimum. My Social Security was $1,400. My small pension from the construction company was another $600. The math was simple and terrifying. I'd be homeless in 3 months. I'd called the other assisted living facilities in Denver. Shady Grove wanted $3,200. Mountain View wanted $2,800 plus a $5,000 deposit. Even the places with health code violations wanted more than I could afford. My savings account had $8,000. Sarah's medical bills had eaten through most of my retirement fund. Even if I found the cheapest room in the worst facility, I'd be broke before Christmas. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was watching Brad systematically erase every trace of my daughter's existence. Wednesday night, I'd caught him going through Sarah's jewelry box. Her grandmother's pearl necklace, the one passed down through 3 generations, was sitting on his nightstand next to a receipt from a pawn shop. "That's not yours to sell," I'd said. "Everything in this house belongs to me now," he'd replied. "Estate law is pretty clear about that." Estate law, as if Brad knew the first thing about legal matters. As if 7 years of marriage entitled him to erase a life. As if Sarah's memory could be commodified, reduced to a dollar amount on a pawn ticket. I tried calling Sarah's friends, hoping someone might have space for an old man to crash temporarily. Most were sympathetic but practical. Young families with their own problems. No room for a grieving father-in-law. I'd even swallowed my pride and called my brother in Phoenix. Haven't spoken to him in 5 years. Not since our argument about Mom's will. He'd listened politely, then explained that his homeowners association had strict rules about long-term guests. "Maybe it's time to consider a retirement community anyway," he'd said. "Might be good for you to be around people your own age." People my own age. As if staying connected to my daughter's memory was somehow unhealthy. By Thursday afternoon, the reality had fully settled in. Brad held all the cards, or so he thought. The phone rang at 3:17. I remember checking the clock, thinking it might be the VA hospital calling about my benefits, another lifeline I was desperately grasping. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local. Mr. Anderson, this is Margaret Franklin from Westlake Legal Services. The woman's voice was crisp professional. I'm Sarah Wilson's attorney. I need you to come to our office tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the reading of her will. Her will. I hadn't even known Sarah had a will. She was 31 years old. Who makes a will at 31? People with cancer, that's who. People who see death approaching with unstoppable momentum. Does Brad know about this meeting? The question slipped out before I could stop it. A brief pause on the line. Mr. Wilson has been notified, yes. It's standard procedure to include the spouse. Of course it was. I hung up the phone and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the faded wallpaper Sarah had picked out when she was 14. Pink roses climbing white trellises. She'd helped me hang it, learning to match the patterns and smooth out air bubbles. We're a good team, Dad, she'd said, stepping back to admire our work. That night I didn't sleep. My mind raced with scenarios, none of them promising. What could Sarah possibly have left me? Her medical bills, her student loan debt, some small personal token that Brad would probably contest out of spite. I doubted it would be enough to secure housing or change my situation in any meaningful way. Friday morning, I dressed carefully in my only suit, the same one I'd worn to the funeral. I polished my shoes, trimmed my mustache, and combed my thinning hair. If nothing else, I would face whatever came next with dignity. That was something Brad couldn't take away. The law office occupied the third floor of a converted Victorian house downtown. Margaret Franklin met me in the lobby, a tall woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She extended her hand, her grip firm and reassuring. Mr. Anderson, thank you for coming on such short notice. I apologize for not contacting you sooner, but Sarah's instructions were very specific about timing. She led me to a conference room with a polished oak table and leather chairs. Brad was already there, scrolling through his phone as usual. He barely looked up when I entered, offering only the slightest nod of acknowledgement. He wore an expensive suit I'd never seen before. Probably bought it just for this occasion, anticipating a financial windfall. Margaret took her place at the head of the table and ranged several documents in front of her. Now that both parties are present, we can proceed with the reading of Sarah Wilson's last will and testament. Brad finally put down his phone, sitting up straighter, a vulture preparing to descend. Margaret opened a folder and began to read. I, Sarah Catherine Wilson, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. The legal jargon washed over me meaningless syllables that couldn't possibly capture the essence of my daughter. What did words like bequeath and hereinafter have to do with a woman who laughed with her whole body, who cried at commercials with puppies, who spent her last coherent days making memory boxes for the children at her elementary school where she taught second grade? I almost missed it when Margaret said my name. To my father, Thomas James Anderson, I leave my entire estate, including all financial assets, personal belongings, and my portion of the residential property located at 1247 Oakwood Lane. Brad's head snapped up. What did you just say? Margaret continued as if he hadn't spoken. Additionally, I hereby exercise my right to dissolve my tenancy in common agreement with my husband, Bradley Wilson, effective upon my death. As the majority owner of said property with a 70% ownership stake, as recorded in the property deed dated May 15, 2017, I hereby grant my father, Thomas James Anderson, full authority to determine the continued occupancy of said property. The room seemed to tilt. Brad's face contorted in confusion, then anger. This is ridiculous. The house is mine. I've been paying the mortgage for 7 years. Margaret removed her reading glasses. Mr. Wilson, I helped Sarah prepare this document myself. I also handled the original property transaction. There is no mortgage. The house was purchased outright by Mr. Anderson here in 1998. When you and Sarah married, he transferred 30% ownership to both of you as tenants in common. Sarah has now transferred her portion back to her father. Mr. Anderson owns 70% of the property. You own 30%. Brad's face drained of color. That's impossible. I have the deed. It's in my name. You have a deed showing partial ownership, Margaret corrected. If you check the percentage allocation on page 3, you'll see exactly what I've described. The truth crashed down around us both. For 7 years, Brad had believed he owned the house. For 7 years, he'd been living in my property. For 7 years, he'd treated me like an unwanted guest in my own home. This is a scam. Brad's voice rose, desperation edging in. You're both trying to cheat me. I'll fight this. Margaret slid another document across the table. This is a court order requiring you to vacate the premises within 30 days unless Mr. Anderson chooses to allow you to stay. Given that you have already served him with an eviction notice, I'd say that's unlikely. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. The same time frame Brad had given me now turned back on him. 30 days to find a place, pack up, and start over. This isn't over, Brad hissed, grabbing his phone and storming out of the conference room. The door slammed behind him, rattling the framed law degrees on the wall. Margaret turned to me, her professional demeanor softening slightly. Sarah knew this would happen. That's why she asked me to wait until after the funeral to reveal the will. She didn't want her last days to be filled with Brad's anger. My hands trembled as I sorted through the documents Margaret had placed before me. Property deeds, bank statements, investment portfolios. The evidence of a truth I'd kept hidden for decades. She told you everything, Margaret nodded, about your real estate development career, about your decision to live simply after retirement, about the agreement you made to let Brad believe he was the provider while you quietly paid off their debts and funded their lifestyle. A lump formed in my throat. She was trying to protect his pride. She thought if he knew the truth that her father was worth millions, it would destroy him. He needed to feel important, needed necessary. And you allowed it? Margaret observed at great personal cost. I hadn't shed tears since the funeral, but they came now hot and sudden. I would have done anything for her happiness, including pretending to be a retired handyman living on Social Security instead of a successful real estate developer with properties across 3 states. The drive home was surreal, the familiar streets of Denver suddenly new under the weight of revelation. I'd maintained the charade for so long that parts of it had almost become true. I'd embraced the role of the helpful father-in-law who fixed leaky faucets and changed light bulbs. I downplayed my business acumen, my investments, my success, all to make a fragile man feel strong, all to give my daughter the marriage she thought she wanted. Brad's car wasn't in the driveway when I arrived home, probably out somewhere drowning his humiliation in alcohol or seeking sympathy from Ashley. I entered through the front door, my front door, and stood in the entryway, seeing the house with new eyes. The faux granite countertops Brad had insisted were just as good as the real thing. The laminate flooring he'd chosen over my suggestion of hardwood. The cheap fixtures and corner-cutting renovations he'd overseen while bragging about his contractor connections. I walked through each room, reclaiming the space with each step. In the master bedroom, Sarah's room that Brad had taken over immediately after her hospitalization, I opened the closet and pushed aside his expensive suits. Behind them, hidden in the back corner, was a small safe embedded in the wall installed when the house was built. Brad had never noticed it hidden, as it was behind the false panel I'd constructed. The combination came easily to my fingers Sarah's birthday. Inside was everything Brad might have discovered if he'd been more observant. Property deeds, stock certificates, the original blueprints for this house with my name as architect and owner. My real life preserved like a time capsule. I removed a single document, a business card for Johnson and Anderson Development Corporation, the company I'd built from nothing and sold for 8 figures 12 years ago. My retirement hadn't been forced by age or economic necessity. It had been a choice, a desire to simplify, to spend time with my family after decades of 60-hour work weeks. Something clattered in the kitchen. Brad had returned, likely to begin the process of damage control. I tucked the business card into my wallet and closed the safe, replacing the panel with practiced ease. Whatever confrontation was coming, I would face it with the truth finally in the open. In the kitchen, Brad stood surrounded by liquor bottles, his expensive suit jacket tossed over a chair. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair disheveled. When he saw me, his expression hardened into something between contempt and fear. "You lied to me for 7 years." His words slurred at the edges. "Made me think I was some big shot when you were pulling the strings the whole time." "I never lied, Brad. I just never corrected your assumptions." The distinction felt important somehow. "Sarah asked me not to. She thought it would hurt your pride to know the truth." Brad grabbed a half-empty whiskey bottle, gesturing with it wildly. "My pride? You let me brag about my house to my friends, my coworkers, my parents. Do you know how stupid I look now? Do you know what this will do to my reputation?" The same reputation he'd built on falsehoods and appearances. The same reputation that had required my daughter to play small so he could feel big. I felt a surge of anger, not just for myself, but for Sarah, who had sacrificed her own authenticity to maintain his illusion of success. "You have 30 days to find a new place." I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I suggest you start looking instead of drinking." Brad hurled the whiskey bottle. It shattered against the wall, amber liquid spraying across the floral wallpaper Sarah had picked out. "You think you've won? You haven't. I'll contest the will. I'll sue you for fraud. You'll do nothing," I interrupted, surprising us both with my calm authority. "Because if you fight this, I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. Not just about the house, but about Ashley. About how you were unfaithful to my daughter while she was dying. About how you complained about hospital parking fees while she fought for her life." His face crumpled, the bravado draining away. "You have no proof." From my wallet, I withdrew a small USB drive, another item from the safe. Sarah knew Brad. She saw the texts. She kept evidence. She didn't confront you because she didn't want her final months to be filled with ugliness. But she knew, and she documented everything. It was a bluff, but a calculated one. The drive contained only family photos, but Brad didn't need to know that. His expression told me everything: the guilt, the shock of being discovered, the realization that his carefully constructed facade was crumbling. "Get out of my kitchen," I said quietly. "Get out of my daughter's bedroom. You can use the guest room until you find a new place. And Brad, don't throw away any more of Sarah's things. They're not yours to discard." As he slunk away, defeated and diminished, I felt no triumph. Only the hollow ache of loss compounded by years of unnecessary deception. I picked up a framed photograph from the counter, one that had somehow survived Brad's purge. Sarah at her college graduation, her arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better," I whispered to her image, "but I promise I'll protect what's left of you now." The next morning, I woke to the sound of a moving truck idling in the driveway. Brad hadn't waited for 30 days. He was leaving now, his pride unable to bear the daily reminder of his humiliation. Through the bedroom window, I watched him load suitcases and boxes, his movements jerky with lingering anger. I didn't go outside to help or hinder. Some wounds run too deep for casual conversation, some betrayals too fundamental for ordinary courtesy. Instead, I made coffee, 2 cups out of habit, and sat at the kitchen table planning my next steps. The house would need work to erase the evidence of Brad's presence. New paint to cover the whiskey stains, new floors to replace his cheap laminate, perhaps even new walls to remove the negative energy he'd left behind. It would be a project, a purpose, something to fill the days when Sarah's absence felt most acute. When Brad's car finally pulled away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in 7 years, I could breathe freely in my own home. For the first time since Sarah's diagnosis, I could face tomorrow without the strain of maintaining someone else's illusion. The grief remained a constant companion I would never entirely shake. But now it had room to exist without the added burden of deception. Now it could transform gradually and painfully into something that honored Sarah's memory without erasing my own dignity. I picked up the phone and dialed Margaret's number. It was time to resurrect Thomas Anderson, real estate developer. Time to use my expertise for something meaningful. Perhaps a project for affordable senior housing so others wouldn't face the false choice between dignity and financial survival that Brad had tried to force upon me. Sometimes the greatest strength, Sarah had told me once, is in knowing when to be silent and when to speak your truth. She'd been talking about her classroom management techniques, but the wisdom applied universally. I had been silent for 7 years out of love for my daughter. Now I would speak my truth, not out of vengeance or bitterness, but because truth is the foundation of dignity. And dignity, unlike houses or possessions, is something that can never be taken away unless we surrender it ourselves. The first weekend in my reclaimed house felt both foreign and familiar, like returning to a childhood home after decades away. Each corner held echoes of Sarah's laughter, whispers of shared moments, but also the acrid residue of Brad's deception. I wandered from room to room, mentally cataloging what needed to be changed, what could be salvaged, and what must be preserved at all costs. The bones of the place remained strong. I'd built it that way with double-thick insulation and hardwood beneath the laminate floors Brad had installed during his upgrade phase. Beneath the superficial alterations, this was still the house where my daughter had grown up. Still mine. By Sunday morning, neighbors had noticed Brad's absence. Mrs. Chen from next door appeared on my porch with a casserole dish and questioning eyes. At 72, she'd lived beside us since before Sarah started kindergarten, watching my daughter grow from pigtailed child to graceful woman. She'd mourned with me when Catherine passed, had planted memorial roses in her garden when Sarah was diagnosed. Now she stood in my doorway offering food in silent solidarity. He's gone then. Her question carried no judgment, just confirmation of what she'd already observed. I invited her in the first guest I'd welcomed without tension since Brad's arrival 7 years ago. In my kitchen again, we sat across from each other while I explained the situation in careful terms, omitting the most painful details. Mrs. Chen listened with the patience of someone who has witnessed life's full spectrum of joys and sorrows. When I finished, she reached across the table and patted my weathered hand with her equally weathered one. I always knew, Tom, about who you really were. A jolt ran through me. How? Her eyes crinkled with gentle amusement. My late husband worked in zoning for 30 years. Your name was on too many successful projects to forget. When you moved in across the street, presenting yourself as a simple handyman, I wondered why. But it wasn't my place to question. We all have reasons for the faces we show the world. The relief of being recognized, truly seen after years of deliberate invisibility, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Mrs. Chen pretended not to notice, busying herself with serving casserole onto plates she'd retrieved from cabinets she somehow knew by heart. The small kindness of this pretense almost undid me completely. It must have been difficult, she continued, maintaining the illusion for Sarah's sake. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. Love makes us do strange things. I would have continued the charade forever if she'd lived. Mrs. Chen's wisdom, earned through her own losses, emerged without sentimentality. Sometimes the greatest gift we give our children is allowing them to believe what brings them comfort, even when the truth would be kinder in the long run. The observation settled between us, profound in its simplicity. Mrs. Chen stayed for an hour, our conversation shifting to neighborhood news and memories of Sarah's childhood Halloween costumes and science projects. When she left, the house felt different, less haunted, more hallowed. Monday morning arrived with purpose. The local hardware store greeted me like an old friend as I filled my cart with paint samples, spackle, and primer. The teenager at the checkout counter did a double take at my credit card, platinum, with the Anderson Development logo embossed beneath my name. You're that Anderson, the one who built the River North development. The question startled me. I'd been out of the business for over a decade, had deliberately stepped back from the spotlight to focus on family. Yet here was this young man, barely old enough to drive, recognizing my name and work. My dad's in construction, he explained, scanning my purchases. He says your buildings are the only ones that never cut corners. Says they'll still be standing when everything else has fallen down. Pride long suppressed stirred beneath my ribs. You tell your father thank you. That's the highest compliment a builder can receive. The young man grinned, handing back my card with newfound respect. Will do, Mr. Anderson. I left the store standing taller than I had in years. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Brad had officially signed the paperwork acknowledging my ownership of the house. He wouldn't contest the will or the property transfer. The threat of his text messages to Ashley becoming public had apparently been persuasive enough to overcome his pride. One battle concluded, though the war of grief continued unabated. At home, I began the physical transformation of the space, starting with Sarah's childhood bedroom that Brad had converted to a home office. I stripped away the generic beige paint he'd chosen, revealing beneath it the lavender color Sarah had picked at 16. Each scrape of the putty knife felt like archaeology, uncovering artifacts of a happier time. By mid-afternoon, I'd removed the built-in desk Brad had installed and discovered preserved behind it a measuring chart marked with Sarah's heights from ages 5 to 18. The pencil marks climbed the wall like a ladder to the past, each line accompanied by a date and sometimes a note. First day of middle school. After summer growth spurt, taller than mom now. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed by this unexpected treasure. My fingers traced each mark, each milestone in my daughter's physical journey. For a moment, the years collapsed, and I could almost hear her childish protest. "Stand up straight, Sarah," I'd say, and she'd giggle, stretching onto her tiptoes to seem taller, while Catherine gently pressed her shoulders down for an accurate measurement. The doorbell interrupted this reverie. Through the peephole, I saw a uniformed police officer, young, serious, clipboard in hand. My heart raced with automatic concern. Had Brad filed some complaint, created some new obstacle? The officer's expression remained neutral as he explained his presence. "Mr. Anderson, I'm Officer Reynolds. We received a report of possible elder abuse at this address." The accusation landed like a slap. Elder abuse. Yes, sir. Complaint says you were being financially exploited and emotionally abused by your son-in-law. Department policy requires we follow up on all such reports, especially those involving seniors. Realization dawned slowly. Mrs. Chen, it had to be. Her husband's connections in city government, her careful questions about Brad's treatment of me, her apparent knowledge of everything that happened on our street. She'd been watching out for me all along, waiting for the right moment to intervene. Officer, I appreciate the concern, but the situation has been resolved. I invited him in, showing him the legal paperwork Margaret had provided explaining the circumstances in the most diplomatic terms possible. The young officer's professional demeanor softened as understanding replaced suspicion. Sir, if you don't mind my saying, this kind of financial exploitation happens more often than people realize, especially to widowers and seniors living with adult children. You're not alone in this experience. Not alone. The words resonated beyond their intended meaning. Throughout Sarah's illness, during the years of Brad's subtle undermining, I'd felt increasingly isolated. Now in the aftermath of truth connections were reappearing like spring buds after winter. Mrs. Chen, the hardware store clerk, even this earnest young officer. The world was reaching out, refusing to let me disappear into grief's shadow. After the officer left, promising to close the case as resolved, my phone rang again. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in years, Jenkins Construction, my former business partner's company. Tom Anderson. I answered, professional habits reasserting themselves automatically. Tom, Frank Jenkins here. Been trying to track you down for weeks. Frank's booming voice transported me back 20 years to construction sites and boardrooms where we'd transformed Denver's skyline together before our amicable parting of ways. Frank had wanted to expand aggressively. I'd preferred selective quality-focused projects. We'd split the company, remained friendly competitors, then gradually lost touch as life pulled us in different directions. How on earth did you find me, Frank? I settled into my armchair, genuinely curious. Frank chuckled, the sound crackling through the connection. Ran into Margaret Franklin at a Chamber of Commerce thing last month. She mentioned you might be coming out of retirement. Said to keep an eye out. Margaret. Always 3 steps ahead, creating opportunities before I even recognize them as possibilities. Frank, I'm not sure what Margaret told you, but I haven't made any decisions about returning to development. Hear me out before you decide. Cities issued an RFP for affordable senior housing downtown. The old Harmon building site. Prime location but complicated zoning issues. Nobody understands Denver zoning better than you, Tom. I need your expertise on this bid. The Harmon building. I knew it well, a historic structure with good bones but outdated infrastructure. Perfect for renovation into senior apartments, challenging enough to require experience, central enough to allow residents access to transportation and amenities without needing to drive. Exactly the kind of project I'd specialize in before retirement. Why me, Frank? You've managed without my input for over a decade. Frank's response carried both honesty and urgency. Because this one matters, Tom. My mother can't afford her apartment anymore. Rent's gone up 60% in 5 years. She's 82 and facing eviction next month unless she finds something affordable. She's not the only one. There's a crisis happening with our seniors, and nobody's building what they need. The parallel to my own fabricated situation with Brad struck me with ironic force. What had been a lie, in my case financial insecurity, forcing relocation, was harsh reality for thousands of Denver seniors. People who'd worked hard their entire lives now faced impossible choices between medication, food, and shelter. Send me the RFP, I heard myself say. No promises, but I'll look it over. Frank's relief was palpable. You're a lifesaver, Tom. I'll email it right now. And listen, I was sorry to hear about Sarah. She was a special young woman. The conversation ended with promises to reconnect soon. I sat in the gathering dusk, thoughts churning. Just days ago, my focus had been survival preserving, Sarah's memory, reclaiming my home, establishing boundaries with Brad. Now possibilities expanded beyond these immediate concerns. A potential project, a return to work that had once defined me, a chance to address a societal need I'd personally glimpsed. Before I could pursue these reflections further, headlights swept across my living room as a car pulled into my driveway. A sleek BMW Brad's car parked beside my modest Honda. My body tensed, involuntarily preparing for confrontation. But the figure that emerged wasn't Brad. It was a woman, early 30s, athletically built, with the perfect posture of someone who makes physical fitness their career. Ashley, the physical therapist. The other woman. the next in line for disappointment. She approached my door with visible hesitation, her confidence faltering with each step. When I opened the door before she could knock, she startled visibly. "Mr. Anderson, you probably don't remember me." Her voice carried the forced brightness of someone who routinely delivers difficult news with manufactured optimism. "I'm Ashley Mercer. I was Sarah's." "I remember exactly who you are, Ms. Mercer." My tone remained neutral, neither inviting nor dismissing. "What can I do for you?" Ashley's professional composure cracked slightly. She shifted her weight fingers tightening around her purse strap. "I wanted to. I need to explain about Brad and me. It wasn't what you think." Inside, I debated shutting the door in her face. What possible explanation could justify their behavior during Sarah's illness? What words could erase the betrayal of a dying woman by her husband and caregiver? Yet something in Ashley's expression, a desperation beyond simple guilt, held my attention. "5 minutes," I said, stepping back to allow her entry. "That's all." In my living room, Ashley perched on the edge of the sofa, refusing the offered water, rushing into her explanation without preamble. "Brad told me you were Sarah's uncle, said her parents were both dead, said you were a distant relative who needed a place to stay temporarily." The lie landed like a physical blow. Uncle, not father, a convenient fiction that transformed me from immediate family to peripheral character, from parent with authority to dependent relation. Another layer of Brad's manipulation unveiled. When Sarah started getting sicker, Brad said it was terminal cancer that had returned after remission. He said they'd been fighting it for years, that this was the third recurrence. He made it sound like you barely knew her, like you'd only recently reconnected. Each fabrication compounded my understanding of Brad's character, the elaborate mythology he'd constructed to justify his actions. Not just to others, but perhaps to himself. Ashley continued, words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "I never would have, if I'd known you were her father, if I'd known it was her first diagnosis. I'm a physical therapist. I work with cancer patients every day. I know how families suffer together. I would never have." "But you did." The simple statement held no accusation, merely acknowledgement of reality. Ashley's chin dropped to her chest. "Yes, I did. And I have to live with that knowledge." She raised her eyes, revealing tears. "When Brad showed up at my apartment 2 days ago with his bags talking about moving in, I finally started asking questions. Real questions. His answers didn't add up. So I did some research, found Sarah's obituary online. Saw your name listed as her father. Realized everything had been a lie. And now you're here because..." I left the question unfinished, curious about her motivation. "Because you deserved to know the extent of his deception. Because I needed to tell someone how thoroughly I was fooled. Because..." She hesitated, vulnerability replacing defensiveness. "Because I thought perhaps understanding his pattern might help us both find some peace." Peace, the word hung between us, desirable yet elusive. I studied this woman who had unknowingly participated in my daughter's final heartbreak. In her, I recognized something familiar. The same manipulated innocence Sarah had embodied when defending Brad's various shortcomings over the years. Different women, same pattern. Different victims, same perpetrator. "He's very convincing." I acknowledged offering this small absolution. Sarah believed in him completely. She thought his ego was fragile, needed protection. She never saw how that supposed fragility was actually a tool for control. Ashley nodded, recognition flashing in her eyes. He always positioned himself as the victim, even when he was the one causing harm. Always had a justification that made you feel guilty for questioning him. Exactly what he did with Sarah. The parallel confirmed my suspicions about Brad's fundamental character, not evil perhaps, but deeply persistently self-serving. A man who rewrote reality to maintain his central heroic position in every narrative. Ashley stood, having delivered her message, having received whatever closure she'd sought. At the door she paused. "I've ended things with Brad for what it's worth. Told him to come get his things from my porch. Some patterns can't be broken if the person doesn't recognize they exist." After she left, I sat with this new information, this expanded understanding of Brad's manipulations. The hurt remained, the sense of betrayal undiminished, but something else emerged alongside it, a clarity about Sarah's choices, about why she might have hidden my financial status from her husband. She'd recognized something fundamental about Brad, that I'd missed his need to be the provider, the protector. The central figure wasn't just preference, but pathology. His identity required others to be dependent, less capable, secondary. My phone chimed with an email notification. Frank had sent the RFP as promised, along with preliminary site plans for the Harmon building renovation. I opened the attachment professional interest, temporarily displacing personal reflection. The project parameters aligned perfectly with my expertise, historic preservation requirements, accessibility standards, complex financing structures involving both public and private funding. The kind of multi-dimensional puzzle that had once energized my problem-solving mind. As I reviewed the documents, a plan began forming, not just for the building itself, but for my own next chapter. What if this project became more than a consultation? What if it became a tribute to Sarah? A living memorial that would help others avoid the very situation Brad had threatened me with. A place where seniors could age with dignity without facing economic eviction or dependence on reluctant family members. The concept took root, growing stronger with each passing hour. By midnight, I drafted initial responses to the RFP, identifying zoning variances needed, suggesting financing structures that would maximize affordability while ensuring quality construction. The work absorbed me completely. Muscles of mind and purpose, long dormant, flexing back to life. Morning arrived with renewed focus. I called Margaret, outlining my intentions for the Harmon building project, seeking her legal counsel on forming a new development entity focused specifically on affordable housing for seniors. Her enthusiasm matched my own, her practical mind immediately identifying potential partners, investors, and municipal supporters. "Sarah would love this, Tom," she said as our conversation concluded, "using your expertise to create something that addresses such a critical need." The observation warned me, confirming my instinctive sense that this path honored my daughter's compassionate spirit. Sarah had chosen teaching for similar reasons, wanting her work to make tangible, positive differences in vulnerable lives. Perhaps in this way, some essence of her would continue. The next weeks unfolded in a blur of productivity. Mornings devoted to restoring my home, afternoons to developing the Harmon project proposal. I re-established old business connections, surprising myself with how many people remembered my work and welcomed my return. Frank and I established a new partnership combining his construction expertise with my development experience, creating a proposal that city officials received with encouraging enthusiasm. Through it all, Brad remained conspicuously absent. His belongings gradually disappeared from the house items collected by friends or movers when I was out. We communicated exclusively through lawyers, the emotional temperature cooling to business-like civility as practical matters were resolved. He made no further attempts to claim ownership of the house content, with receiving his 30% equity payout as negotiated by Margaret. 3 weeks after the will reading, a certified letter arrived from Brad. Inside was a single key, the one to my tool shed, and a brief note acknowledging that the tools inside belonged to me. No apology, no further communication, but this small gesture of restitution suggested some minimal recognition of boundaries. I accepted it as the closest thing to amends I was likely to receive. Word of my situation spread through the neighborhood, then wider circles. Mrs. Chen had apparently shared the story with her extensive network of friends and family, creating a protective community around me without my awareness. Neighbors I barely knew stopped by with casseroles, offers of help with house repairs, invitations to dinner. Their kindness, while occasionally overwhelming, served as a powerful counterweight to isolation. One Thursday evening, a knock at my door revealed Rebecca Winters, Sarah's closest friend since college. She stood on my porch holding a shoebox, her expression a mix of determination and hesitation. "Sarah gave me this before she went into hospice," she explained once seated in my living room. "Made me promise not to give it to you until at least a month after she was gone. Said you'd need time to process everything else first." The box sat between us, unassuming, yet suddenly the most significant object in the room. I recognized that the floral pattern had contained Sarah's first pair of adult shoes bought for a high school dance. She'd kept the box, repurposing it for various treasures over the years. "Did she tell you what's inside?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Rebecca shook her head. "Only that it was important, that it would help you understand her choices." With trembling hands, I removed the lid. Inside lay an assortment of items: photographs, folded papers, small mementos. On top was an envelope with my name written in Sarah's distinctive handwriting, the letters formed with the careful precision that had characterized her final months, when each movement required deliberate effort. Rebecca stood, sensing the privacy this moment demanded. "I'll leave you to it, Tom. Call me if you need anything." Alone with Sarah's final message, I opened the envelope with reverent care. Inside was a letter dated 3 weeks before her death, written during a period when pain medications had granted her temporary clarity. Dad, it began. If you're reading this, then the medical statistics won after all, and I've become one of the unfortunate 18 who don't survive this particular cancer. I'm sorry for leaving you alone. Sorry for all the things we won't share, holidays and birthday celebrations and ordinary Tuesdays. Sorry most of all for the complications I've created with Brad. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to continue reading. I need to explain why I asked you to hide who you really are all these years. It wasn't just about Brad's pride, though that was part of it. The truth is more complicated. When I first met Brad, I was drowning in grief over Mom's death. He seemed so confident, so certain about everything when I felt lost. That certainty became my anchor. The revelation struck deep Sarah's attraction to Brad, not as simple romance, but as lifeline during devastation. A psychological dynamic I'd failed to recognize, too consumed by my own grief over Catherine, to see my daughter's desperate grasp for stability. As time passed, I began to see the cracks in Brad's confidence, how easily it shattered when challenged, how his certainty depended on never being wrong, never being second best. By then we were married, building a life. When you offered to help us buy a house, I watched his reaction, the humiliation, the sense of failure. I couldn't bear to see him that way, couldn't bear to lose the stability I'd found flawed though it was. Sarah's handwriting grew shakier in the next paragraph's evidence of physical struggle as she continued her explanation. So I suggested our arrangement, your financial support, hidden behind the fiction that the house was Brad's achievement. It seemed harmless then, a white lie that had protected everyone. I didn't realize I was building our marriage on quicksand, didn't understand how one deception would require endless others. The painful truth emerged through her words, how the initial compassionate fiction had trapped them all in escalating falsehoods. Brad believing himself the provider when he was the provided for. Sarah pretending financial struggle when her father's resources were always available. Me playing the dependent handyman when I was actually the property owner and financial backbone. By the time I understood the damage we were doing, it was too late to undo it without destroying everything. And then came the diagnosis, and suddenly untangling our web of pretense seemed insignificant compared to the limited time remaining. I chose to maintain the fiction until the end, to spare all of us that particular reckoning while facing death. Her final paragraphs carried a different energy, not apology but affirmation, not regret but resolve. But I couldn't leave you vulnerable, Dad. Couldn't leave you at Brad's mercy once I was gone. That's why I worked with Margaret to ensure the house would revert to you, why I documented everything in case Brad contested the will. Not out of vengeance, but protection. You deserve to reclaim your true self, your achievements, your dignity. Tears flowed freely now, dropping onto the paper, mingling with the ink. Please forgive my part in asking you to diminish yourself all these years. Please know it came from love, misguided though it might have been. And please find your way forward. Return to the work that once fulfilled you. Build something meaningful in my memory. Live fully enough for both of us. Her signature at the bottom, your Sarah always, nearly undid me completely. I sat clutching the letter, feeling simultaneously the acute pain of her absence and the profound gift of her understanding. In death, she had seen more clearly than in life the consequences of well-intentioned deception, had taken steps to correct what could be corrected, to protect what needed protection. The box contained other treasures, childhood art. I'd forgotten photographs, I'd never seen, small tokens of moments we'd shared. But it was the letter that transformed me, that granted permission to reclaim not just my home and financial standing, but my full identity. To honor Sarah not by diminishing myself, but by expanding into my capabilities, by creating something worthy of her compassion. That night, I worked until dawn on the Harmon Building proposal, infusing it with new purpose. The project would include not just affordable apartments, but community spaces, gardens, a childcare center where residents could interact with younger generations. It would be beautiful as well as functional, dignified, rather than institutional. It would acknowledge the full humanity of its residents, their need for both independence and connection. When Frank reviewed the expanded vision the next morning, his response was immediate and enthusiastic. This isn't just a building anymore, Tom. It's a mission. It's Sarah's legacy, I corrected gently, and perhaps mine as well. The words crystallized my path forward, not merely surviving Sarah's loss and Brad's betrayal, but transforming both into motivation for meaningful action. Grief would remain a constant companion rather than temporary visitor. But alongside it could grow purpose, connection, even joy, not as replacement for what was lost, but as testimony to its enduring impact. A week later, I received unexpected news through Margaret. Brad had left Colorado entirely accepting a position with an insurance company in Arizona. He'd requested that his portion of the house proceeds be donated to cancer research in Sarah's name rather than sent to him directly. A small gesture of atonement, perhaps, or simply a desire to sever all connections to his past. Either way, it offered a clean conclusion to our entangled history. That same afternoon, Mrs. Chen invited me to a neighborhood potluck she was organizing. "Time you rejoin the living, Tom," she said simply, brooking no argument. Sarah would insist. Looking at the calendar, I realized with shock that nearly 2 months had passed since Sarah's death. Life had continued its relentless forward motion, carrying me from acute crisis into something resembling a new normal. Not healing that suggested an endpoint to grief that experience taught me doesn't exist, but adaptation integration, the slow process of building meaning around the permanent wound. I accepted Mrs. Chen's invitation, recognizing it as a threshold between isolation and community. The same evening, I submitted the final proposal for the Harmon Building project, now officially named the Sarah Wilson Residences at Harmon Square. Another threshold crossed another commitment to moving forward without leaving Sarah behind. That night, standing in Sarah's childhood bedroom, now cleared of Brad's office furniture, but not yet repurposed, I studied the height markings on the wall one final time. Each pencil line represented a moment when we'd marked growth, celebrated change, while maintaining connection. Tomorrow, I would carefully cut out this section of drywall, preserving it as a tangible reminder of Sarah's journey from child to woman. Then I would repair the wall, painted a new color, create a space that honored memory without being imprisoned by it. "I'm finding my way forward, Sarah," I whispered to the empty room. "Building something meaningful, just as you asked. Living fully enough for both of us." Outside, Denver's skyline glittered against the night sky, a panorama partially shaped by my own past work, waiting to be further transformed by what I would create next. Not despite my losses, but because of them. Not to escape grief, but to give it purpose. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time since Sarah's diagnosis, it held promise. And perhaps that was the most fitting tribute of all. Spring arrived in Denver with characteristic unpredictability. 70 degrees one day, snow flurries the next. 3 months had passed since Sarah's death, a calendar quarter marked by gradual transformation rather than sudden change. The house had evolved room by room, each space thoughtfully reconsidered. I'd preserved what mattered most. Sarah's height chart now carefully framed in my study, her childhood artwork professionally mounted in the hallway, while creating an environment that reflected my reemergence into the world. The framed architectural drawings in the living room openly acknowledged my professional past. The renovated kitchen featured the high-end appliances I'd always wanted, but had sacrificed to maintain the fiction of modest means. The shutout back had been converted to a home office where I spent mornings reviewing blueprints and afternoons on video calls with contractors, engineers, and city officials. Nothing ostentatious, nothing wasteful, just authentic, no longer hidden. Mrs. Chen had become a regular presence, stopping by with baked goods and neighborhood gossip, sometimes lingering to offer opinions on design choices or potential furniture arrangements. "That sofa is too modern for a man your age," she'd declared upon seeing my selection for the living room. The next day, she'd arrived with fabric swatches and the number of her late husband's upholsterer. Her candor was refreshing after years of careful self-editing. No more downplaying my knowledge when conversations turned to real estate or construction. No more feigning confusion about investment strategies or tax implications. No more performing the role of dependent elder when I'd spent decades being precisely the opposite. Other relationships blossomed as well. Frank Jenkins and I had fallen back into our old professional rhythm, his practical building expertise complementing my development and finance skills. The Harmon Building project had advanced from proposal to approved plan, with groundbreaking scheduled for early summer. City officials had embraced our vision for affordable senior housing that preserved the historic facade while creating modern, accessible living spaces inside. The project had garnered local media attention, first a small piece in the business section about a veteran developer returning to transform a downtown landmark, then a human interest story connecting my personal loss to the mission of creating housing security for vulnerable seniors. The Denver Post photographer had captured me, standing before the vacant building, blueprints in hand, the morning light illuminating both structure and purpose. Margaret had framed the article, presenting it during one of our regular strategy lunches. "You're not just building apartments, Tom. You're building a movement." The mayor's office called me yesterday about the possibility of similar projects in other neighborhoods. The expanding vision exhilarated and terrified me in equal measure. After years of deliberate invisibility, stepping into such public purpose required adjustment. Yet each time doubt crept in, I remembered Sarah's final letter: "Build something meaningful in my memory. Live fully enough for both of us." Not all changes proved equally successful. My first attempt at dating coffee with a widow from Mrs. Chen's church group ended in awkward silence and mutual relief when the hour concluded. The second dinner with a retired librarian Rebecca had introduced went marginally better, but revealed how atrophied my social muscles had become. 7 years of performing a role had eroded my ability to present my authentic self in new relationships. "Be patient with yourself," Rebecca advised during one of her visits. "Grief has its own timeline, so does rediscovery." Her words resonated with wisdom beyond her 35 years. Rebecca had become another unexpected connection, stopping by weekly with updates about her life and recollections of Sarah that often began with, "Did she ever tell you about?" These stories, Sarah's perspective on events I'd witnessed or experiences I'd missed, added dimensions to my understanding of my daughter, like discovering new rooms in a familiar house. "She admired you more than you knew," Rebecca shared one evening as we sorted through a box of Sarah's college mementos. "Used to say her biggest challenge was living up to the example you set, building something lasting in the world, while never losing sight of what really matters." The observation caught me off guard. I'd always assumed Sarah's choice of teaching reflected Catherine's influence rather than mine. Learning that my daughter had seen parallels between building structures and building young minds shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our relationship. These revelations accumulated gradually, creating a more complete portrait of Sarah than I'd held while she lived. Each memory shared by her friends, each discovered note or photograph, each story recounted at community gatherings where her name arose naturally in conversation, all contributed to this posthumous knowing, this continued relationship that defied physical absence. One Tuesday morning in April, the doorbell rang as I reviewed supplier bids for the Harmon project. Through the peephole, I saw a face I never expected to encounter again. Brad Wilson, looking thinner than when he'd departed 3 months earlier, wearing a suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. My immediate impulse was to ignore the bell, to refuse this unwanted return to a chapter I'd considered closed. Yet curiosity prevailed over caution. What could possibly bring Brad back to my doorstep after his hasty departure? His donation of the house precedes his relocation to Arizona. He stood straighter when I opened the door, summoning dignity like a borrowed jacket. "Mr. Anderson?" The formal address marked our altered relationship, acknowledging the truth we now shared. "I hope it's okay that I came by." "It's your right to ring the doorbell," I replied evenly, "but you can't come in without an invitation." Brad nodded, accepting this boundary without protest. "I understand. I just wanted to tell you something." I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me, a symbolic gesture reinforcing that my home remained my sanctuary, not a space he could enter at will. The spring air carried the scent of Mrs. Chen's newly planted roses and the promise of warming days ahead. "I'm living in Grand Junction now," Brad began, his voice steadier than his posture. "Moved in with my mom temporarily. Got a job with a smaller insurance company. Less money, but more honest work." This wasn't the information I'd expected, not an accusation or demand, but a status report delivered without apparent motive. I waited, maintaining neutral expression, allowing him to navigate this conversation he'd initiated. "I started seeing a therapist," he continued when I offered no response, "talking about why I needed to feel important all the time, why I couldn't just be grateful for what I had." The admission revealed vulnerability I'd never witnessed in Brad, whose carefully maintained facade had prioritized strength over authenticity, achievement over acknowledgement. I remained silent, neither encouraging nor discouraging this unexpected confidence. "She helped me understand something," he pressed on, words gaining momentum. "I was so afraid of being seen as a failure that I convinced myself I was entitled to success. Didn't matter whose success it actually was." The insight, presumably hard-won through therapeutic intervention, articulated precisely what Sarah had intuited years earlier. Her letter had described exactly this pattern, this desperate fear beneath Brad's bravado. Hearing him voice the realization himself created an unsettling symmetry, a completion Sarah hadn't lived to witness. That's a hard lesson to learn. I acknowledged offering this minimal response. Brad's next words emerged with visible effort. The hardest part is knowing that Sarah knew, knowing that she protected me from the truth because she was afraid I couldn't handle it. The observation hung between us, demanding response. Could you have handled it 7 years ago? Brad considered this for a long moment, gaze fixed on the porch floor. Probably not. I was too insecure, too proud. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But maybe if I'd been forced to face reality sooner, I wouldn't have become the kind of person who kicks a grieving father out of his own house. Before I could formulate a response to this tentative accountability, a car pulled into my driveway. Margaret arriving for our weekly project meeting, her timing impeccable as always. She nodded politely to Brad, but remained in her vehicle, respecting the private nature of our interaction while providing subtle backup should I need it. Brad noticed her arrival, shoulders tensing slightly. I should let you get to your meeting. As he turned to leave, I found myself calling after him. Brad, he paused, expression a mixture of hope and trepidation. Thank you for bringing me Sarah's ring. That meant a lot. The small acknowledgement of his one decent act seemed to affect him more deeply than recrimination would have. She would have wanted you to have it. Margaret approached as Brad retreated, her expression carefully neutral until he had driven away. Everything okay? Her briefcase contained the latest contractor estimates and timeline projections, the practical business of building proceeding regardless of emotional currents. Fine, I assured her, though the encounter had stirred complex feelings. Just unexpected closure. Inside, reviewing construction schedules and budget allocations, my thoughts kept returning to Brad's visit. Not with anger or resentment, but with a strange sense of completion. His acknowledgement of wrongdoing, however belated, offered confirmation that I hadn't imagined or exaggerated his behavior. His recognition of Sarah's protective deception validated the painful choices she'd made out of love for both of us. You seem distracted, Margaret observed as we concluded our business. Brad's appearance bothering you. I considered this, searching for the right words. Not bothering, just thought-provoking. He's in therapy, apparently, developing self-awareness. Margaret's expression reflected professional skepticism. People can change if they're genuinely committed to the process, but they rarely transform completely. I don't need him transformed, I realized aloud, just accountable. And it seems he's at least beginning that journey. Before leaving, Margaret handed me an envelope, an invitation to a Chamber of Commerce dinner where the Harmon Project would be formally introduced to Denver's business community. They want you to say a few words about the vision behind it. Nothing elaborate, just personal enough to connect with potential donors and partners. The prospect of public speaking awakened immediate anxiety. I'd always preferred working behind the scenes, letting buildings speak for themselves, allowing others to serve as the public face of projects. Yet this was different, a mission born from personal experience, a purpose that required authentic voice. I'll think about what to say. I promised, already drafting possible approaches in my mind. After Margaret left, I walked through the house, my house indisputably mine now, in both legal and emotional terms. Each room reflected deliberate choices about what to preserve and what to transform. The overall effect was neither shrine nor complete reinvention, but thoughtful integration of past and present memory and possibility. In what had once been Sarah's childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest room that would welcome Rebecca or other overnight visitors, I'd preserved a small corner dedicated to my daughter. A shadow box displayed her favorite childhood doll alongside her college diploma and teaching credentials. A digital frame cycled through photographs spanning her 31 years. A small bookshelf held volumes she'd loved, from worn Dr. Seuss to dog-eared Jane Austen. You were right, I told her, image frozen mid-laugh at her college graduation. It was time to reclaim my real self, my work, my purpose. I just wish you could see the result. The following week brought accelerated activity as the Harmon Project advanced from planning to implementation. Permits cleared final approval. Contractors mobilized equipment. Security fencing appeared around the perimeter. Each morning I visited the site, watching the careful interior demolition that would preserve historic elements while creating space for modern necessities. Frank supervised the construction aspects while I focused on financing, community relations, and design refinements. The division of labor played to our respective strengths, creating momentum that attracted additional support. A local foundation committed matching funds for the community spaces. A tech company offered to wire the building for high-speed internet and provide tablets for residents. A nearby medical center proposed establishing a satellite clinic in one of the ground floor retail spaces. What had begun as straightforward affordable housing evolved into something more comprehensive, a model for integrated senior living that acknowledged the full spectrum of needs beyond mere shelter. Each new partnership expanded possibilities while increasing complexity, requiring constant adjustment and problem solving. "This is why you were the best in the business," Frank remarked one afternoon as we resolved a particularly challenging structural issue. "You never see just walls and floors. You see how spaces shape lives." His observation touched something essential, the philosophy that had guided my most successful projects before retirement. I'd always approached development as more than financial investment or physical construction. Buildings weren't simply assemblages of materials, but environments that either supported or hindered human flourishing. This understanding had differentiated my work from competitors focused solely on square footage and profit margins. The Chamber of Commerce dinner arrived amid this creative intensity. I'd prepared remarks that connected my personal experience with the broader societal need, hoping to inspire investment without exploiting Sarah's memory or revealing more than propriety allowed. Margaret had reviewed the speech, pronouncing it powerful but dignified, exactly like its author. The event itself exceeded expectations. 200 of Denver's business and civic leaders gathered in a downtown hotel ballroom, their interest evidenced by thoughtful questions and substantial donation pledges. The mayor announced expedited review processes for similar projects in underserved neighborhoods. A prominent banker promised preferential financing terms for developments meeting specific affordability criteria. Amid this professional triumph, a personal connection emerged unexpectedly. Carol Mendez, the hospital administrator who'd overseen Sarah's oncology department, approached during the cocktail reception following formal presentations. "Mr. Anderson," she greeted me, extending her hand, "your daughter would be immensely proud of what you're creating in her honor." The comment might have seemed generic from someone less intimately connected to Sarah's journey, but coming from a woman who had witnessed our family's most vulnerable moments, it carried profound weight. Carol had been present during critical consultations, had arranged special accommodations during Sarah's final weeks, had demonstrated compassion beyond professional requirement. "Thank you for saying that. I managed emotions suddenly near the surface. And thank you for everything you did for Sarah." Carol's smile reflected shared understanding of what remained unspoken. Healthcare professionals see families at their worst moments. It's rare that we get to witness the positive transformations that sometimes emerge from tragedy. "What you're building, it matters, Mr. Anderson. It addresses a need I see every day in my work." Our conversation expanded beyond polite exchange into genuine dialogue about the challenges facing seniors after medical crises, the gap between hospital discharge and true recovery, the isolation that often accompanies aging, the financial devastation that can follow serious illness. Carol's frontline experience complemented my developmental perspective, suggesting possibilities I hadn't considered. "We should continue this discussion," I suggested, as other attendees waited to speak with her, "perhaps over coffee sometime." The invitation emerged naturally without premeditation or agenda, simply recognition of mutual interest and potential collaboration. Carol's acceptance, "I'd enjoy that very much," carried similar straightforwardness, professional connection with possibility for something more. Driving home that evening, I realized how dramatically my social landscape had expanded in the months since Sarah's death. From isolation to engagement, from hiding to visibility, from passive acceptance to active creation. The transformation hadn't erased grief, but had placed it within a larger context of continuing life, continuing purpose. The following morning, sunlight streamed through kitchen windows as I reviewed email on my tablet, responses to the previous evening's presentation filling my inbox. Corporate pledges, media inquiries, potential partners. The project had clearly struck a chord, addressing a recognized need with innovative approach. Among these professional communications appeared a message from Brad, its subject line a simple "thank you." The body contained just 3 sentences. "I saw the article about your project in the Arizona Republic. It's an amazing tribute to Sarah. I know I have no right to ask this, but would it be okay if I sent you a card on Sarah's birthday just to let you know I'm thinking about her?" The request required consideration rather than immediate response. Did I want this fragile connection with the man who had caused such pain? Would maintaining minimal contact serve any purpose beyond reopening wounds? Was complete severance healthier than regulated interaction? Sarah would have encouraged compassion, would have seen Brad's request as evidence of growth rather than entitlement. Yet Sarah's generous heart had also enabled Brad's worst tendencies, creating the very situation that had culminated in crisis. Balance seemed key, neither vengeful rejection nor unguarded acceptance. After careful reflection, I composed a measured reply. That would be fine, Brad, but don't expect me to send one back. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. With this small matter resolved, I returned to the day's priorities, finalizing fixture selections for the Harmon apartments, reviewing applicant criteria with the housing authority, preparing for afternoon meetings with potential commercial tenants for the ground floor spaces. Work that energized rather than depleted, purpose that expanded rather than constricted. June arrived with groundbreaking ceremony for the Sarah Wilson residences at Harmon Square. City officials, business partners, media representatives, and curious neighbors gathered beneath a white tent as Denver's mayor praised the project's vision and impact. Sarah's former principal spoke movingly about her dedication to creating supportive environments for vulnerable children, a mission now extended to vulnerable seniors through her father's work. Standing at the podium, surveying the assembled supporters, I felt simultaneous humility and pride. This gathering represented not just professional achievement, but community connection, relationships formed or strengthened during months of planning and advocacy. Mrs. Chen sat in the front row, elegantly dressed for the occasion, her presence bridging my past isolation and present engagement. Frank stood nearby, our partnership embodying the power of renewed purpose after setback. Margaret watched with quiet satisfaction, her legal and strategic guidance having transformed conceptual vision into contractual reality. Carol attended as well, our coffee meetings having evolved into regular conversations about the intersection of healthcare and housing, the continuum of support necessary for dignified aging. Her professional interests remained primary, but something personal had begun developing alongside it, tentative exploration of connection beyond common cause. Today we begin constructing not just apartments, I told the assembled crowd, but community. Not just housing, but home. Not just shelter from economic storms, but sanctuary for full living in later years. The words emerged with surprising ease, reflecting genuine conviction rather than rehearsed rhetoric. This project represented more than professional resurgence or personal healing. It embodied lessons learned through loss and recovery, through deception and truth-telling, through diminishment and reclamation. As ceremonial shovels turned symbolic, first soil cameras flashed and applause erupted. Mrs. Chen approached afterward, her formal reserve softening into uncharacteristic display of emotion. Sarah is seeing this, she said, simply squeezing my hand. Mothers and daughters always do. The observation startled me with its presumption of Catherine's continued awareness, as well its suggestion of ongoing maternal presence despite decades of absence. Yet something in the sentiment resonated beyond theological consideration or metaphysical belief, the sense that love transcends physical presence, that relationship continues beyond biological ending. Construction proceeded through summer and into fall, the Harmon Building's transformation visible in daily increments. Original brick walls stood freshly pointed and cleaned, while interior spaces took shape according to carefully considered plans. Each decision, from doorway width to lighting placement, from flooring material to cabinetry design, reflected commitment to creating environments that supported independence while acknowledging potential limitations of aging. My involvement remained hands-on rather than merely supervisory daily site visits, ensuring quality and addressing inevitable complications before they became serious problems. This direct engagement differentiated the project from typical development, infusing construction with personal investment beyond financial interest. Workers responded to this presence not with resentment, but increased commitment, understanding that standards reflected purpose rather than arbitrary perfectionism. My grandmother's moving in here when it's done, one electrician confided, while demonstrating how he'd added extra outlets in locations convenient for seniors with limited mobility. Figured I'd wire it right the first time. Such moments accumulated, creating collective ownership that transcended contractual obligation. The building itself seemed to respond to this care, revealing unexpected treasures during renovation. Original hardwood beneath laminate flooring, decorative moldings behind drop ceilings, stained glass transoms hidden by previous modifications. Each discovery allowed integration of historic character with contemporary function, preserving authenticity while ensuring accessibility. Personal life developed alongside professional progress, tentative steps toward normalcy that occasionally surprised me with their naturalness. Dinner with Carol evolved from professional consultation to genuine date conversation, extending beyond project-related topics to personal histories, shared interests, potential futures. Mrs. Chen's Sunday potlucks became regular social engagements where neighborhood connections deepened beyond superficial acquaintance. Rebecca's visits expanded to include her fiancé, then their wedding invitation, then their announcement of expected first child. Life continued its forward momentum, pulling me along sometimes willingly, sometimes reluctantly, but inexorably onward. Not away from Sarah, she remained a central reference point in internal presence, but toward integration rather than isolation, participation rather than observation. The best tribute to those we've lost, Carol observed during a quiet dinner at my newly renovated home, is living with the same authenticity they would have wanted for themselves. The observation captured something essential about my evolving approach to grief, not performance of recovery, but genuine engagement with continuing life. Not replacement of what was lost, but expansion of what remained. Not diminishment of Sarah's importance, but enlargement of the world in which her memory resided. December marked both first anniversary of Sarah's death and major construction milestone at the Harmon project. Interior walls completed, windows installed, mechanical systems operational. The building now stood weather-tight as winter descended, allowing finish work to proceed regardless of external conditions. Applications for residency had exceeded available units threefold, confirming the desperate need for affordable senior housing while creating difficult decisions about selection criteria and priorities. The anniversary itself arrived cold and clear, Denver's winter sunlight illuminating frost patterns on morning windows. I'd planned this day carefully, balancing acknowledgement with forward movement, remembrance with presence. Morning visit to Sarah's grave, afternoon at the construction site, evening gathering of those who had known and loved her. At the cemetery, frost crunched beneath my feet as I approached the simple granite marker bearing Sarah's name, dates of birth and death, and chosen epitaph, teacher, daughter, light. Fresh flowers in winter-proof containers already adorned the site, evidence of others' visits, continued connections beyond my own. I added my own contribution, a small snow globe containing miniature representation of the Harmon building, custom-made by a local artist to capture the project Sarah had inspired. "It's really happening," I told her, breath visible in December air. 64 apartments for seniors who might otherwise face impossible choices. Community spaces for intergenerational activities. Medical clinic, library, branch cafe. Everything we talked about during those hospital nights when future projects seemed like fantasy rather than possibility. The one-sided conversation continued, updating Sarah on project details, neighborhood developments, personal adjustments. Not from belief that she heard in literal sense, but from recognition that articulating these changes helped integrate them into my understanding of continuing life. Speaking to Sarah, even in her absence, maintained connection, while acknowledging separation honored relationship while accepting its transformed nature. At the construction site, workers had arranged small, surprise, informal gathering with coffee and donuts. Brief pause in activity to acknowledge the project's inspiration. No speeches or ceremony, simply quiet recognition of the day's significance for the developer whose personal loss had sparked public purpose. "We're on schedule for May completion," the site supervisor reported, review of progress providing comfortable structure for emotionally charged moment. Ahead on some interior elements, slightly behind on elevator installation, but overall exactly where we planned to be. The technical update offered perfect balance, acknowledgement through action rather than expression. Commitment to excellence as tribute rather than words. These practical people had found practical way to honor Sarah's memory, embodying respect through their dedicated work rather than conventional consolation. Evening brought more formal remembrance, dinner at my home for those closest to Sarah and those who had supported me through the year following her death. Mrs. Chen arrived early to help with preparations, bringing homemade dumplings and unsolicited but welcome advice about table arrangements. Rebecca and her husband followed, then Margaret and her partner, then Carol, then several of Sarah's teaching colleagues and closest friends. The gathering avoided funeral atmosphere through deliberate focus on celebration rather than morning stories shared emphasizing Sarah's humor and impact rather than her absence. Laughter mingled with occasional tears as memories circulated, each person contributing, perspective that expanded collective understanding of who Sarah had been beyond individual relationships. She once confiscated my phone in class, one friend recalled, and instead of turning it into the principal, like other teachers, she took a bunch of ridiculous selfies and changed my background picture to her crossed-eyes face. During Teacher Appreciation Week, another shared she wrote personalized poems for every staff member, over 60 people, and snuck them into mailboxes with little drawings specific to each person. These stories, some familiar, others new, created tapestry of remembrance, far richer than solitary grief, demonstrating how Sarah's influence extended beyond family bonds into wider community. Her life, though shorter than deserved, had created ripples still evident in changed behaviors, inspired actions, continued connections. As evening concluded, guests departing into winter night with warming embraces and promises of future gatherings, I found myself standing in my kitchen with unexpected sense of peace. Not absence of grief that remained constant companion, but its transformation from consuming fire to sustaining warmth, from isolation to connection, from ending to continuation. Carol remained after others left, helping with final cleanup. Comfortable silence between us, evidence of developing understanding. "You did this beautifully," she observed as last dishes were put away. Honored Sarah without being trapped by loss. Brought together people who might otherwise have drifted apart without her as common connection. The observation captured exactly what I'd hoped to achieve. Commemoration that strengthened community rather than focusing solely on absence. It's what she would have wanted, I acknowledged. Sarah always saw relationships as the most valuable currency. Later, sitting together in the living room, embers of fireplace providing gentle illumination, Carol asked the question others had carefully avoided throughout evening. "Do you think you'll ever feel her absence less acutely?" The query demanded honest response rather than comforting platitude. "No," I admitted after thoughtful pause. "But I'm learning that grief isn't something to overcome or move past. It's more like terrain to be navigated, changing with seasons, but always present. The landscape of loss becomes familiar rather than less real." Carol nodded, her professional experience with death and bereavement complementing personal understanding of attachment and separation. That's healthier than the cultural myth of getting over it or finding closure. "There's no closure to love." I agreed, the phrase emerging without premeditation but carrying deep conviction. Only continuation in different form. The observation seemed to resonate beyond discussion of Sarah extending to potential between us, tentative exploration of connection that honored past attachments while acknowledging present possibilities. Not replacement, but expansion. Not forgetting, but incorporating. Not moving on, but moving forward, carrying what matters while remaining open to what might come. As year's end approached, progress continued on multiple fronts. The Harmon project remained on schedule for spring completion. Interior finishes transforming institutional spaces into inviting homes. Tenant selection committee had finalized criteria balancing financial need with diversity goals, creating community rather than merely housing. Commercial spaces had secured occupants aligned with the overall vision. The medical clinic, a branch library, a cafe operated as job training program for seniors seeking part-time employment. My relationship with Carol developed gradually, thoughtfully, each step taken with mutual awareness of complex histories we both carried. Not rushing toward defined outcome, but allowing connection to evolve naturally, building foundation of shared values and complementary perspectives before considering more formal commitment. New Year's Eve found us at the Harmon building, special permission granted for after-hours visit to space nearing completion. Temporary lighting illuminated finished apartments where paint dried and fixtures awaited final installation. Future community rooms stood empty of furniture but rich with possibility, large windows offering panoramic view of downtown Denver's celebration preparations. In 5 months, seniors who might otherwise face homelessness will be making this their home. I observed as we toured spaces that had previously existed only as blueprints and vision statements, creating new chapters in surroundings that support dignity rather than diminishment. Carol's perspective added crucial dimension to architectural achievement. What you've built here goes beyond physical shelter. It's psychological sanctuary, acknowledgement that aging deserves respect rather than relegation to society's margins. The observation articulated exactly what had driven the project from conception Through completion conviction, that environments shape experience, that dignity requires both physical support and social recognition, that aging represents continuation rather than conclusion of meaningful life. As midnight approached, we stood at windows overlooking city, prepared for transition from one year to next. Artificial boundaries humans impose on continuous flow of time. Fireworks would soon illuminate skyline, crowds would cheer arbitrary moment, invested with symbolic significance. Resolutions would be declared with varying degrees of commitment and follow-through. What do you hope for in the coming year? Carol asked, question conventional yet meaningful in our specific context. I considered the query thoughtfully, looking beyond expected responses toward authentic aspiration. Integration, I finally answered. Not moving past grief, but incorporating it into continuing life. Not forgetting Sarah, but honoring her through forward movement. Not closing chapters, but writing new ones that build upon rather than replace what came before. Carol's hand found mine in gentle affirmation of this complex hope. That seems like the truest form of loyalty, not to freeze time at point of loss, but to continue living in ways that reflect what we've learned through loving and losing. Her wisdom echoed and expanded my own emerging understanding that honoring those we've lost means neither forgetting them nor remaining trapped in moment of separation, but rather carrying their essence forward through choices that reflect shared values and continued connection. As fireworks began illuminating Denver's skyline as another year prepared to surrender to history, while new possibilities emerged on horizon, I felt Sarah's presence not as ghost-haunting present, but as foundational influence shaping future. Her compassion lived on in the project nearing completion. Her courage informed my tentative steps toward new relationship. Her authenticity guided my reclaimed professional identity. Not diminished by time or distance, but transformed by love that transcends physical presence, by connection that defies separation, by meaning that outlasts mortal limitation. In this understanding lay not just consolation, but conviction that what we build outlasts what we lose, that what we love survives. What we fear, that dignity found cannot be permanently lost, but only temporarily misplaced, awaiting rediscovery through courage and compassion. As New Year arrived with customary celebration and symbolism, I welcomed not just calendar change, but deeper transformation, from surviving to creating, from remembering to honoring, from existing to living fully. The journey remained unfinished. The path forward neither straight nor simple, but direction had become clear. Forward movement with backward glance, new creation with honored foundation, future possibility with treasured memory. Sarah had given this final gift not just through her explicit instructions, but through the example of her life, the legacy of her choices, the continuation of her influence beyond physical presence. The house remained mine, but its significance had expanded beyond mere ownership to embody reclaimed identity and renewed purpose. My life remained mine, but enriched rather than diminished by grief's transformation of love into lasting legacy.